1, 2, 3, 4.
In this podcast, you will be here. Knights of Vader, Knights of Vader includes, but is not limited to, talk of Star Wars, not ray guns. We can't truly prepare for the jump that follows this song, but hey, we gave it a try. So here's the Knights of Vader. Crystal Fox reports they are divided. Prequel, sequel, hate and love they fight. I know that we are just musicians hired, and their time is up. So here's the Knights of Vader.
Impressive. Most impressive.
A big thank you to An Inspiriority Complex providing our theme song. It is April 14th, 2024. My name is Zach Weber, and joining me today is Joe Yazzo.
Hello, everybody.
And Grand Admiral Zenger.
Yeah, I'm here.
And the Portius with the Mortius.
Hey, happy to be here, guys.
And Russ.
McClunky.
Hello, guys.
We should have asked him about a McClunky take.
Oh.
Alrighty, folks. That seems like a weird non sequitur, but you are going to hear an interview that Chris arranged, set up. Chris, please introduce what this week's episode is going to be about in honor of not just May the 4th, but the May 3rd release of The Phantom Menace.
All right, so we are lucky enough to have a little chat tonight with Roger Christian. Roger was a set decorator on A New Hope, and the production design team won an Oscar for that. And he was also the second unit director on Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to bother him about what he did on The Phantom Menace and get some novel stories from the set of The Phantom Menace to celebrate this anniversary. So I think you guys are going to really enjoy it.
Open fire.
We are extremely privileged to be here with Roger Christian today, and we've gone over a little bit of his film background in the intro there. The bottom line is we're real excited that episode 1 is coming back to theaters for May, and Roger was second unit director on episode 1. And I've seen a lot of his interviews online, and we don't see a whole lot of him talking about episode 1 at length, so we thought what a great opportunity to bother him about that. How you doing tonight, Roger?
I'm great, thank you.
All right. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got hired on to do second unit for episode 1?
Yeah, well, I was, my long-time association with George from the first Star Wars and helping him out. And after Star Wars, I'd gone on and done Alien and then Life of Brian, and then I decided enough's enough. And so I wrote the short film Black Angel, which I couldn't afford to do as a student because I'd gone back to film school. And by chance, it got sent to George, who commissioned it, which meant I got a grant from the British government of £25,000 and made the short film. So he started me as a director. So there was an association there. And the second short film won an Academy Award, which was great. It's kind of helped to get me on the way. And I was waiting then for my feature to trigger. We're always waiting for people to give the green light. It was a kind of little bit of a story. I was in San Francisco doing the sound mix on a movie, and George had asked to see me because I was next door. So I went up to the ranch. I met Rick McCallum, who was the new producer then. And they said, why don't you come and see us in Leavesden when we're setting up? And I said, yeah, okay, that's fine. And I went away. And then I went to Leavesden, and I was sent to meet the designer. And Rick McCallum said, could you go and talk to him? And it was an immediate, how do I cope with George? What do I do? He doesn't say anything. How do I guide? And I said, calm down. All you do is show George what you're doing. You come up with everything. That's how he expects everyone to work. And if he likes it, you'll get a smile. If he doesn't like it, he'll tell you, and then you change it. And this time you've got fantastic drawings for Doug Chiang, who took over from Ralph McQuarrie. And they were both the engines of Star Wars for the look. I met the set decorator, same thing. What do I don't know? I said, just prepare everything and show it to George. This is how you work. Then I went to see the director of photography, who I'd actually started, David Tattersall, doing commercials. I gave him his first big job in Italy. He then said to me, Roger, we're shooting this whole film in 12 weeks. It'll be impossible. Why aren't you doing second unit? Because you did it on Return of the Jedi. So I said, well, I don't know. I went back to Rick McCallum and George, and I said, by the way, who's doing second unit? And they said, oh, we don't need second unit. We've got this one covered, and we're going to save a bit to do at the end. And they said there were about 3 or 4 shots that Ben Burt was going to do. Well, I thought, well, you're in denial because this is a big film. So I said, look, I just put my name down because I love this world and I like working with George. So next thing is I get a call when I'm in a health club in London working out. What are you doing now? And I said, I'm working out. And they said, can you drive up to Leavesden right now? And I go in and there's George and Rick. And they said, were you serious about second unit? And I said, yeah, I'm always serious, especially with Star Wars. You know that. And they said, well, could you do it? And how would we do it? And so I said, look, George, I have now directed myself, and I know how to do second unit with movies, how I have. Most second unit directors want to get a job from the producer. So they're not actually doing necessarily what the film wants. They're doing stuff that they think will get them noticed. So I said, I cope with it by having a little clamshell monitor, which I can carry around. And I have a little tiny movie camera, small one. And I shoot stuff, and then the second unit director shows me, and then we go through it, and then we're all doing the same thing. So George said, Rick, buy those right now. And then they said, well, can you do it? Can you start? And I said, well, I could. I was just going back to San Francisco because I was doing the one piece of color grading on the movie I was doing. And Rick looked at me and said, no, you've got to give an answer in 5 minutes. We're going to leave the room. Please give us an answer. Have a think. So I knew I could get the director of photography to do it. So they came back in and I said, okay, yeah, I can start now. And they said, good, come with me. They had a room arranged with an assistant. And I went in and did kind of talk to them, and they said, here's the reason why we need you to do it. We had, Rick McCallum was the producer of Young Indy, and they were based in Prague. And they had, over the 5 or 6 years, got 2 crews working like clockwork. David Tattersall was a DP on one, Giles Nutkin's the DP on the second one, and they would leapfrog. One each was main unit, then the next one would go, and then they'd leapfrog again. So they had these 2 crews. So they said to me, look, we can't schedule in the time. You're going to have to go in first unit. On the first one I had to do was in the big Senate with, the floating pods. So we had to go in first on that. And this happened about 5 or 6 scenes. So then I kind of understood. And then George kind of looked at me and he said, what are you doing exactly at the end of September? And I said, well, I'm here. If I sign on, I sign on. That's what we do. And he said, good, because I have to leave. I think it was about the 29th of September. I have to go back. So you'll have to finish the film.
Wow.
So it was quite a
okay
challenge. But that's how it came about.
So the Senate scenes were your first experience of actual filming scenes for episode 1?
It was pretty early on, yeah, once we started, but it was a matter of scheduling. That they were scheduling what they were doing, but they couldn't get in there, and so I had to go in first, and I had Terence Stamp. I had to shoot some of his stuff because George couldn't get to it. So it actually wasn't the first things we did, because like the Star Wars, the first one, we started in Tunisia. Both crews flew there first because the heat was building. And Natalie Portman, who George wanted, had a theatre commitment. So it was one of the first things we shot when I got back to Leavesden Studios, but we actually started in the desert in Tunisia.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because there's some fantastic sort of behind the scenes stills of you and George and you shooting some of the pod race stuff out in Tunisia, and I think that some of the only pictures I can find of you on set from that sort of stuff. So I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit of a rundown of the scenes that you remember doing for episode 1.
It was a lot. We might take more than an hour.
What stands out to you looking back?
I like every one. I mean, I just love this world and love doing it. So they're all equal to me, actually. But one thing I did do there was I said to George, for luck, there's a scene where they're shooting at the pod races up in the valley. So I said, you know what, for luck, I'd like to go back up to the valley where we shot scenes on the very first Star Wars. And they said, well, okay, if you like, because we had to get donkeys to get the equipment up then. But I did go there, which was fun to do, and a little bit different now because George had cut stuff together already. And so I was just following cuts. That was great. The pod race took up a lot of my time in Tunisia. We were shooting so many scenes. There were actually the crowd scenes, and because of Natalie Portman, we were down shooting in July and August. So now the Tunisians themselves and the locals call it Suicide Week in August. And it was hot enough that I joked about it and said we could probably fry an egg on R2-D2, and we did. so it was, I mean, fierce. Ewan was fine with it. Natalie and Liam would leave just after lunch or lunch break. They couldn't take the afternoons. The heat was horrific, but we had to just keep going.
I think Ewan would have got off a little easy on that. He didn't have too many scenes on the actual Tatooine.
No, and he was just walking about going, I'm in effing Star Wars.
There's some wonderful behind-the-scenes shots of Liam Neeson with some gear designed to cool him off a little bit out in the desert with rainbow-colored umbrellas and stuff.
Right. Yeah. So, something memorable was we were pretty early on, and I was one night we just got back to the hotel, and everybody was freaking out. There was the sound of a storm coming, and I was worried about it. And because of what happened on the first one, and everyone was laughing and shouting, and the curtains were blowing in. It was really fierce. I got up early. I went out. There's a picture of me with the destroyed pods that were there. I went out with Rick and George and the others first thing in the morning, and it had destroyed so much that these storms. I'd been to a village which was destroyed in one night by the hail and wind that came down. They're fierce if they come. To give this then the British crews, and Rick McCallum always said this was amazing. All of the caravans, all of the food trucks, everything were upside down. I mean, there was just carnage. And I remember walking about in there, and then somebody came running up and saying, I found Liam's beard in the dirt and stuff like that. They were shooting again at 2:00 in the afternoon. They put it back together and got going. And then I was shooting at 3:00 as a second unit, straight on that. So it kind of, they kind of grin and bear it and get stuck in and get it done. It really impressed Rick, because this was his first kind of example of this crew. Certainly it was amazing to be kind of back there again, even though with the heat. And I think you've seen the pictures. They built Tatooine completely in the desert, because that had gone in Jerba. There was no cantina, there was none in Mos Eisley. It's all been developed, so they actually built the whole city there, which was
Yeah, like as you know, Roger, as the stuff that was left behind from the sort of Mos Espa set, it was all ended up in a junkyard somewhere, and collectors have gone there and picked over it not long after the production wrapped. So there's a lot of set deck and stuff from the Tatooine scenes that have survived. We know that you did a little bit of the final duel in episode 1. Could you talk a little bit about that, just the filming that duel?
Well, that was back in Leavesden, and we came back, and there was just mountains of work to do. I got a lot. There were 2 or 3 things that I got, and we started actually in the desert in Tunisia. We had to shoot part of the fights and partly with Darth Maul, and we had those ramps that you fire, and I was shooting him, the start of his leap off.
Oh, right.
One thing while I was there, if I keep on it, which I'll never forget. Yeah. So, you know, when Darth Maul, at the end of the fight, the ship's leaving and he's on the landing platform that's down, and he jumps off and nails it in the desert against the sunset. So I got that shot to do, which was memorable for me. At the same time, what's her name? Who's the famous photographer?
Rolling Stone, right?
Yeah.
Annie Leibovitz.
Annie Leibovitz. So she wanted to shoot that shot. So there became a battle because, as I said, I've got the movie to make. And this was going back between assistants, not between her and I. And assistants were negotiating on the day of it. And I said, well, you know, let me talk to her. So she and I met on the place, and we'd had a huge platform built to get the exact right shot and everything. And I said, Annie, there's nothing I can do. George has to get the shot for the movie. However, if we set up the same time, and I know that we'll get it in one take. He's so good at, he's a 9th Dan stick fighter. So I said, I'll get it in one take. You can fire right on that moment. So we agreed a kind of compromise. And he did. He nailed that shot. It was just stunning. And it was right at sunset in the desert. That went in the trailer, actually. I remember that shot. And so I'd filmed quite a bit of the Darth Maul stuff.
On the subject of that, sort of the brief sort of desert duel that's earlier in the film, while we're on that, I'm not sure like the scope of what was sort of revised or removed or on that scene. In mentioning Annie Leibovitz, she has a shot where Obi-Wan's actually fighting Darth Maul out in the desert, which he must have been around and in costume that day, but in the movie he's not in that scene, obviously. So I don't know, what do you recall? Like, do you recall any him being involved in that in an earlier version, or was that done just for the photo shoot, do you think?
No, there was. I think that was partly shot there. He was down there the whole time.
Well, yeah, she has a great shot of Ewan facing off with Darth Maul in the desert. That is, it's in the Rolling Stone spread, but it's Ewan's not part of that fight in the movie. Yeah. So it's interesting to see what was going on there if you remember.
Yeah, and I do like that they are vying to film these iconic scenes as well. Like, no, we got this. We really need to get this. So. Yeah,
that could have been just for her setup. I would imagine that one. Yeah. Actually. There was quite a bit, and I had a lot of George kind of handed over to me R2-D2 and C-3PO, a lot of it, because especially R2-D2, although ours never worked on the first film, we were pulling him on fishing wire to make him work. Now they worked, and in fact, when I first started up in Leavesden, the first thing I did was went and looked at the R2-D2s, because they were such a struggle on the first Star Wars, and even on Return of the Jedi, they were getting better. And they showed me, and it was filled with equipment and everything. And I said, is this built for Kenny? And they said, yeah, this is the one Kenny will go in. So I said, have you had Kenny in it? Oh, no, it'll be fine. I said, no, it won't be fine. I'm calling him down tomorrow. Kenny arrived. It's very sweet. he arrived in a Rolls-Royce Corniche that he'd bought and had adapted. And that was the first thing he did. He said, Roger, come, please, I got to take you. And we were driving around Leavesden Airport. He was so proud of himself. Anyway, they picked him up. There was no way Kenny would go in this thing. And also, he was enjoying the good life, so he put on weight. And I put him on a diet immediately. He actually never got in it, ever. He was in the hotel we were staying out, sunning himself in a thong a lot of the time. And
he probably still get his name on the poster too, which is great.
Yeah,
being iconic. And you've also so I know. Speaking of iconic scenes filmed, you filmed the first meeting of R2D2 and C3PO, correct?
Well, that was in Leavesden, and I said to my crew then, today, and I don't know how aware you are of this, but this is real canon. This is something that's very important. And so George had filmed parts of the scene, and then I had to shoot R2D2 coming in and C3PO, who was unclothed at that time, without his gold skin, and had that meeting, which was like kind of, for me, it was really impressive. And the line, I don't know if you know, naked, what do you mean naked? Carrie Fisher wrote that line. That was one of hers.
I actually had a set design question about that, since you were, so known for making a lot of iconic props. In that scene, a lot of people have pointed out that it looks like a scoop ball game hanging in it, because this is filmed in Anakin's room.
Right.
Did you have any idea that would be noticed so much later on? As just a set design person yourself?
No, I didn't. No, these things get picked over and they put stuff in. And, I was very careful on the first one, whatever I put in, because I had everything worked out. And I think this one, they were slightly different kind of science fiction addicts, which I was. And then going back to the Darth Maul, so I had to do, there was one scene whereby he does a huge leap across. There were three of them fighting, and I had to do that in one shot. And the only person who could do it was Darth Maul, who fired off a huge ramp, went across and hit the mark and stood. The two professional stunt guys couldn't do it. They went into the boxes every time. And I had to call George over and I said, what do you want me to do? Do you want to cut this? Because he wanted it in one shot. But he said, no, I'll get Ray Park to come up to the ranch afterwards, and I'll shoot it up there. He can play each one of the characters. He was that good. And then, I shot. There was, again, it's just so memorable to me, And then there's parts of the Darth Maul Liam fighting that George would shoot what he needed with expressions and takes and stuff, and then I did a lot of the actual fight scenes. Pretty amazing stuff to do, and it was so different to what we were doing on the first one because everything worked.
Well, looking back at episode 1, and I'm actually so excited to see it in theaters again. I'm holding off. I'm glad I haven't seen it for 2 years. It's going to be awesome to watch it again on the big screen. But looking at the Duel of the Fates, the fight specifically, something that stands out to me thinking about it is there's you do have a sort of a lot of long static shots, especially when Ewan's fighting Ray Park near the end, after Qui-Gon's already down, and it's almost like it almost looks like it's showcasing Nick Gillard's choreography more than being worried about camera movements to hide the fact that the actors aren't really doing it, for example, right? So could you talk a little bit maybe about, were there any discussions you had around that? Do you remember sort of deliberately setting it up in any specific way to showcase that choreography? It was, and that's the difference. Nick Gillard was there and was arranging those fights, and he found that especially Ewan was fantastic at fighting, and so was Liam as well, from his background. So George kind of
focused more on letting the scenes run sometimes rather than cutting too much. That's more of George's technique. So we did the same. We were setting up block cameras. And again, everything I did, I monitored with George first to get exactly what, because he's very precise about what he wants to go into the film. I got a lot back in Leavesden of Jar Jar Binks. Anything, he would do the main where they were talking together with especially with Natalie or the others, and then I had a lot of the rest of the stuff always playing about in Watto's den where things are firing off. I had to do that entire sequence with him.
That was a big part of the promotion of the film, was those scenes with him, when he uses his tongue to grab things.
Right.
Things like that, yeah.
Yeah, so I did a lot of that. And I did a lot of R2-D2 stuff. And then we shot outside. They put a green screen up on the big stage wall, and they had the swamp laid out in the studios. So there's one where he's running from the distance, coming right through past camera. I got that one to do. It's funny how it works. I mean, with Liam Neeson, he's riding one of the Banthas. So I got that scene with Liam, and I called him over, and he's interesting because Ewan would just go and do whatever he wanted and show you. Liam was an actor who really needed to be explained a lot. So I got him, and he's sitting on a kind of green screen chair with 4 grips walking along with him. So I explained exactly what we were doing, and he looked at me and said, "It's so nice to be explained exactly what is going on."
Was he implying that George was not explaining?
Yes. Yeah. George is famous for the, go faster, gotta go bigger. But he was a lot more vocal on this one. Yeah, he's funny.
Yeah, he's supposed to assume that Liam Neeson knows what an Eopie is. He's like, "And this is what you're riding." It's like,
yeah.
Space camel.
Yeah, and I had to shoot this. I had to shoot Natalie. I shot with all of the main actors. It was just, for me, it was fantastic. There was, and the whole film, just to say that it was very like the first one, the whole attitude. It was like a low-budget independent film, but this one now, George didn't have a crew against him. He was by now respected. He had a massive ILM crew, and we had everything pre-visualized by them. They still used a lot of scrap and junk, and I don't know if you know, but it was after Star Wars and Alien, they realized in Britain, well, this is worth money, so you can only rent it now. You can't even go and buy it. It was cheaper for Rick McCullen to get a big transport plane and buy a load in the Texas graveyards in America and have it shipped over. And it's still kind of independent in a way, and it was $110 million, which is George's own money. But Rick told me at the beginning that he sent the script out to each of the studios and said, "Could you give me a budget on this? Because we may have to shoot in the States instead of Leavesden." And they each came back at $400 million, which gives you an idea of the tightness that George and Rick run the films. And it's a huge film. I mean, when you watch it, it was exhausting because we were like racing against the clock, and we only had the 12 weeks as well. It was like every day was packed, and so they gave me the extras to do, which is what second unit do, right? So first off, we're in the desert, and it's like 50 most days, 50 degrees. I mean, it was like fierce. There's these stadiums, kind of bleachers set up. So the first day, I got 4 cameras. I got everything I could because I knew these poor extras, half were in rubber suits and things. And it was that hot, they had to wear gloves with the cameras. It was that hot, they were heating up. So I think about 200 or 300 were there for the first day. They were down. Half wouldn't turn up again because.
Wow.
And I got it with my first AD, and I got the cameras, and I said, look, what we're going to do, we're going to roll the cameras, and then when I go action, the crowd go, and we had crowd guys working them, and I said, I'll give 2 minutes and cut, and that's it. And always one fainted, whatever. And by the end of it, we were down to about 30 at the last point when I was doing it. They all left. They said, even though they needed the money. And I asked Rick, I said, Rick, why are we shooting this here in this heat?
I was just going to ask why. I wouldn't have thought those crowd insert shots would have been done out there. That's blows my mind. I never realized that.
Well, Rick's response was, Roger, London, extras, we have to transport them in and transport them out. We have to feed them 3 times a day, and I have to pay them, I don't know how much it was, a lot of money. Tunisia, here, they just turn up. We don't have to feed them, and they're like a few bucks each day, and he walked away.
Yeah. Well, I guess bleachers are easier to build than a spaceship.
Yeah, they are. But I had to do a lot more back in Leavesden. We set up for the end scene when all the crowds are down there, and I only had about 30 extras, and I locked the cameras off and shot them one by one in different areas, and then they could just match them all together. So they weren't just duplicated. Each one was a different movements each one of them had. I shot quite a lot of them like that to build those up.
I wonder if those extras realize that they're probably an action figure at this point, or they will be in the future. Just for one day out in the heat, I would do it just to be like,
exactly. Yeah.
So I do have a question for you. Since you worked on both the original trilogy and the first episode of the prequel trilogy, what are your thoughts on the fact of going to the more digital side of it, where like you as somebody who was big into the set design, everything like that, going away from that to where it's just a ton of blue or green screen. And now Star Wars is going back to practical effects. Do you think that was a mistake for them to step away from that?
Well, I personally like the real versions, when you're shooting stuff for real, because there's an organic process that goes on, and there are mistakes, and the mistakes often create magic. There's a bit of light moves or some smoke or something happens. And I think that part of that reason that the audience actually accepted Star Wars, because they'd never accepted a science fiction film before that. They never believed they were real. And, they were a different, obviously, story. But Star Wars, I don't think anyone questioned, they'd gone and shot this in location, or they'd done it. It was real. And I think that, for sure, makes a difference. And they still shoot a lot of models now and stuff, and a lot of people do use practical whatever they can. But George, in every single film he's ever written, wrote what couldn't be done, and he always says himself, "Well, I wrote it, and then I think somebody will figure it out who we've hired," which we did. However, we did it, and I've repeated this often now, that when you look at Watto is actually the first fully formed CGI character who's absolutely real. I mean, to me, that's the breakthrough. Jar Jar was also, pretty amazing, but a lot of him was in the suit and stuff. But Watto is pretty amazing when you look at the history of cinema and what came after that you could do it. You could create a character now. And I shot quite a bit with him too. We had an actor with a coolie hat on his head, a Chinese coolie hat. Was
it the voice actor of Watto or just someone else?
Just a voice actor, yeah.
I believe it was the
that's
same
the
guy
same.
who was the slave owner in Gladiator. Was
correct, yeah. And they used his voice.
I was playing the same character, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think they used his voice anyway. He was actually, because he was performing. He wasn't just being there in a coolie hat. He was actually performing the character the whole time.
Yeah, he's really impressive, and especially when they go back to him again in episode 2. You see him again a little more battered and beaten down, and even more realistic. Like the improvements just in those couple of years between episode 1 and 2.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so going to your history of creating many iconic props, lightsabers, blasters, whatnot, from the sequel trilogy, the only iconic weapon or even prop I can think of is Kylo Ren's lightsaber.
Yes.
Is there anything from your eye that stands out that we missed over the last almost 10 years of the sequel trilogy that really caught your imagination from that relatively new era of Star Wars?
No, it was only disappointment because the set deck on Empire Strikes Back, who I knew very well, but he was better off doing period films and stuff like that. He took my lightsaber and then they put rivets around the T-strip, which to me completely ruined it because suddenly it wasn't a mystical object of a Jedi. It was a handmade thing with rivets in it. And that carried through, unfortunately, right to the end until Dave Filoni finally put it back in Mandalorian in Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series when it's dug up in the desert. And I was anxious watching TV. Which one's he going to dig up? Is he going to have the rivets? And it didn't. It had my original one. God bless him, Dave Filoni.
That keeps with canon as well, because then the next time it would be seen would be in A New Hope. And maybe, I guess, in canon, Luke fiddled around with it and thought he could put some accoutrement.
Yeah. You can excuse it, yes.
It's really funny when you consider what is meant to be the same lightsaber in episode 3 is like a full redesign. Like, it's not a Graflex per se, but it sort of looks like it, but the episode 3 version is different again. So, it gets buried in a box and it morphs over time, apparently. Yeah. So, Zach, it looks like Roger's not blown away by any iconic designs from the sequel trilogy.
I did like Kylo Ren's lightsaber when I saw it. And we'd established on the very first one, and I was using those sticks in the end of the lightsaber, they could hit against each other, but it was established then that these blades shouldn't cut through. They should be like samurai swords. And I did like that. And there was a kind of reason behind that guard across, that it wouldn't cut into the hand. It would stop on that. So that was what I got impressed by most, actually, when I saw it. And I thought that weapon was pretty cool, I have to say.
In the sequel trilogy,
I can't remember anything else that stood out.
Well, they definitely focused on some of your designs. If you think about in Force Awakens, the bowcaster gets more love than in any film. I mean, before that, you might have seen, Chewbacca shooting wildly at cameras or lasers, whatever those things were. But it becomes an entire, plot device for a little while where Han Solo gets to use it for the first time, and it's very much focused on. So
I love that.
Some of the most iconic things are still the same ones.
Yeah, and they're more and more in Mandalorian and the other series. Now look at the Tusken Raiders gaffy stick. Now there's got a whole history. What I did like was those dice that I put in the first one that disappeared. And they're only in 1 or 2 scenes on Star Wars, and then they came back. JJ put them back in The Force Awakens, but they cut that scene out and didn't use them. But I did like that they became a whole story with when Luke gave it to Leia as a kind of memory of Han. That became a story. And also, the thing that I did like was we put a crashed spaceship outside the cantina for the reason that there was an olive tree and it was spoiling the entire desert look. And these are poor farmers. We couldn't go and chop it down. So John Barry said, well, we'll put a crashed spaceship. So it was the size of a Boeing 747, huge. In a way, that's carried through to every single Star Wars movie now. There is always crashed junk spaceships everywhere in it. That was what stood out to me, actually, that I thought, wow, this has become these things that we just threw in for reasons that were never actually for on purpose became canon, if you like. They became part of the whole Star Wars look of everything.
Yeah, I can say there was a video game where you could kind of wander all around Mos Eisley, and they had a cantina in there. It was called the Fallen Star Cantina, and you could walk around inside that crashed spaceship, and there was a bar upstairs.
Oh, you could?
Yes,
really?
yes.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. I must ask my elder son because he plays all of those.
Yeah, I think it was Star Wars Galaxies. It was like a free roaming game where you could just live in that on that planet.
Yeah. And then really?
I know what you're talking about now.
Cool.
It's something. It's very interesting that not only, I mean, you were involved in Star Wars, creating a ton of the stuff from there. I just imagine when you're watching something like, there's another thing I created, or there's another thing that I helped design.
Yes,
it's that Leonardo DiCaprio thing where he's snapping and pointing at the screen and everything. But you also contributed to the design and everything with Alien, which. It blows my mind that these are two franchises that if you show me a still from either one of those, it's instantly recognizable. So if you could just walk us through, if you don't mind, just what it took to come up with something, like to make something that iconic and instantly recognizable.
It was just my burning ambition to make science fiction like how I saw it, and I was influenced by, there's a graphic novel created called Bilal. I don't know if you've ever seen his stuff, but his one called Woman Trap, which is London destroyed. And he was Romanian. So when I filmed Nostradamus, I realized where it all came from. Everything was kind of destroyed and old. And I just wanted everything to be believable. And I'd worked on Final Program, which is a Michael Moorcock book, a film that we made in England. And he had what I always detested, but I had to do it, which was like a plastic needle gun that shot needles. And I just wanted to make everything. It was a kind of reaction to, and George had the same exact vision, because he always told me, I'm making a documentary, I'm not making a feature film. So make everything that it was a real world. Mm-hmm. And I got the chance with Alien to go even further, really, that obviously I knew Ridley and I art directed commercials for him. And then he wanted more of that look on Alien. He called it like a space truck. And it was inspired really by the Millennium Falcon hold, which we encrusted with pipes and to make it look like a submarine or something that had that quality, because even in space, they're not like Star Trek, where there's all this money and you build these big cockpits with big windows and you sit in chairs. It's not like that. If you look at Apollo even, they're crammed with stuff to get it in because they're worried about weight, and everything is working. And that was my reasoning always, that it had to be somehow real. And I think
it had to be practical. It had to be something that obviously was used or should be used.
Should be or used. I drove the special effects boys nuts on getting the bridge ready on Alien, because I said every switch has to work. When the actors do something, a light should come on, something should move. And I always think that I'm looking at it from the audience who need to believe, so then they can follow the story. They're not having to go, why are all the science fiction people in the future dressed in Indian Nero collars? If you look at science fiction, for some reason that was an idea of the future. And I always thought, how do we make it so that it's got that penetration? And it's a thankless job in a way for the art department, because you're not noticing it, so you're not going, wow, look at these designs, how they were in the early days. And I think George had that same vision, obviously, when we started, and I think he understood, because he made THX 1138, and they had to do that with little money on the streets and go out and make things work that were real. And in the documentary I've made, Galaxy Built on Hope, which I'm trying to get out, I interviewed Gareth Edwards, and he actually is a big part of the movie, because to me, Rogue One was one of the best of the Star Wars
yes
movies.
Yes.
And he's interesting because he explained when he was starting Rogue One, they were talking about weapons, and they said, we'll bring you a load and we'll put them out and you choose, right? They put all these weapons out, and he was looking at them and he said, well, this one just looks like a World War II gun. This is not Star Wars. And they went, well, actually it is. That's Han Solo's pistol that was used on the first one. And he said, I realized then that you take an object and you change it like 20%, just a tiny bit. It's, the gaffy stick. I found an old mace and I drilled the end and stuck it on the end of the gaffy stick because it just changed a bit. That is what I did with the Sterling submachine guns. To me, they're like a science fiction weapon. They're beautiful. So I think that carried through with everything that we did. But on Alien, I got, because I was art directing and I was like in charge of that whole look for Ridley, I got a chance to do corridors and the bridge and everything. And to me, I always said afterwards, well, I think we got that one right. And I just like that look. There's somehow, I have a blend of inherited somehow mechanical kind of how things should be. And then also, and I always loved science fiction. I read science fiction when I was young. So I started with the Eagle. I don't know if you ever know the Eagle comics. I used to have it delivered every week. And they had a character called Dan Dare. So
nice. Just with those two franchises, there's not a whole lot of stuff that's 45 years on, has new trailers for the latest sequel, within the last month. But I don't know if you caught the new trailer for Alien Romulus, but aesthetically, it's looking a lot like the first Alien movie.
It looks a lot like it, which is a huge relief because normally they go against it. But, going back to Phantom Menace, I mean, the movie to me is fantastic. It was huge. When you look at it on the big screen, the pod race itself is worth the price of admission, just if you had that. And I think everything, as we all know, Jar Jar got a bad rap, but George is still true to himself that he makes his films for 9 to 12-year-old children, and he's still one of their favorite characters. Just adults couldn't take that kind of, it was silent film put into it for humor, but it's coming round now. It's taken quite a long time, but it's coming around, and it is a huge movie, and I think it's really good. When I look at it again now, I think
I believe there's been a lot of Jar Jar redemption, definitely the last couple of years, and the fact that Ahmed Best has been given not only a game show, a Star Wars game show where he's a Jedi Master, he's been included in the what was the recent show? He's in the Obi-Wan show?
Mandalorian. Kylo Beck.
Yeah, Mandalorian, I think. Yeah, I'm so happy because I'm in touch with him, and he's such a sweet, good man, very talented. So I keep telling him I'm so happy that he's come out of the dark. The light wins, you see. That's Star Wars.
So I do have a question.
Yes.
Because a lot of the stuff that you found, especially during the first Star Wars, you go to a camera shop and next thing you know, you found the lightsaber. That was like the missing piece to everything. Nowadays, you could just sit there and design it onto a computer and get it 3D printed. Do you think if they had technology around that time, it would have cheapened it because it wouldn't have been so hard to look for the right piece? You could just sit there and create it?
Yeah, I still prefer looking for it and finding it. But, when I saw the graphics, it was just an immediate recognition. My instinct went, there it is. John Barry described it as there's something about an object that's made very precisely for what it's meant to do, but you're not quite sure what. And when you see it, so it has that element. Again, it's real. It looks real. And when you start to design everything, even Doug Chang, now, every time he's stuck, he said, I go to the files, Ralph McQuarrie's already designed it. It's already sitting there in drawings. And I don't know if you know, but Ralph when early on, he worked for Boeing. He was drawing jet engines and things. So he had that innate mechanical knowledge, how things would actually work. Ron Cobb was the same on Alien. Ron, I would go to him all the time, Ron, and say, can you make me I need a transporter that would sit in the hold that would go out like a moon buggy. He'd draw it up for me within an hour. I could sit there while he did it. And then he, not only that, he'd say, well, this would have a Rolls-Royce so-and-so engine, and this would have this propeller, and this, he would go into the whole reason behind it. But again, what do we make it? We made it out of junk. I got one of the young assistants, and they find what you can and make this. And so they did out of junk.
One of my favorite junk things is the communicator in the original Star Wars that they have to use. That you found it like in a drain pipe.
Yes, that again. Sometimes serendipity or the destiny strikes. I was actually showing John Barry in the office because he was designing something and he wanted some pipe work for it, and I brought up a U-bend from a toilet or under a sink. And I was just kind of undoing the piece of it when the phone rang, and then John spoke, and then he looked at me and said, George has changed his mind. He needs a communicator down now to put into a stormtrooper's hands, because I'd left that one. And literally as he said it, it dropped. The filter dropped into my hand, and I went, now, look at that. There it is. And I literally put, I think, one ring around it, went straight down to the stage. George took it, smiled, and it went straight into the shot.
And that tradition continued into episode 1 because the communicator in that movie was a Lady Bic razor.
Yes.
It was.
The tradition of found garbage.
You've got one.
On the subject of the communicator, I got to ask you this because I've always been wondering about it. Is there any connection with that part on the Stormtrooper's helmet and the comlink that 3PO uses? Because it's got the mesh on the end.
I think it is, yeah.
It's almost the same size. So was that co-designed, though? Because, like, it looks almost the same piece, but it's black.
They probably took them because when they were doing these are all sculpted in clay first. They're not done on computers. They probably took, because I only had one actually, but whether they stuck that in, it is the same. Now I look at it.
I assumed that maybe canonically in the film they pulled it out of a stormtrooper helmet or something when they were using it running around, but it's a different color a little bit. So but I know there's a very specific guy who put the stormtrooper armor together, and maybe that's a question for him, but it might be pure coincidence if you don't know about it, but it looks very close.
It does look very like it. I never pointed it out. You see, I find things every day.
Now, my question is this: Does mine look better than Chris's does? Because since he's showing off, I'll show off too.
Hey, it had a very practical purpose this time to pull something out.
I've got one here. My son's got one that you push the button and it talks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
These will totally do that too.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I do have a follow-up question to the communicator. Is it possible that if we rewatch the film, there's going to be a stormtrooper that doesn't have one of those pieces on it because that's the piece that you found in the drain?
There you go.
Maybe. Maybe. Could be.
That one that knocked his head, it slipped out.
Yeah. Speaking of like making different stuff for the scenes, everything, and the practicality of it, what I don't want to put you on the spot here with this, but is there a certain item that might have wandered off set that you prize or that you were very proud of making, or that you might have in a personal collection of yours?
There was no faith in this film. Nobody thought anything would ever be seen.
So it was grab and run at the end.
Everything was junked. And the guns I made, because I couldn't afford to make them, they were rented. We stuck pieces on them and did it. They all went back into Baptist. They've done since then. They've made them, but on ours, most was. So I've still got the original. We had, when I found the Graflex handles, there were 3 in the box. I raced back to the studios and I made it up. I stuck on the T-strip because I had some left over from from the Sterlings, and that day I'd undone a Texas Instrument calculator, because that's what I used to do, is take things to bits, find things, and the bubble strip popped out, and it exactly fit in the clip, which was the one thing on the Graflex that I thought was too obvious. After that, and I interviewed David French, who's the manager of the camera. They rented and sold and bought cameras, stills materials. And I interviewed David French, the manager, and we asked him about the stories of this. And he tells the story of me coming in and asking if I've got something and where to find it and everything. And then they asked him afterwards, well, what happened towards the end and how many went in there? And he said 33 Graflex handles were bought for the film. And he said, how much did it cost? And he said, I had to bill them for £850. Can you imagine? So what he did, he rented them out. He rented press cameras for all the 40s films. So he had a huge collection of them like that. So I've still got a couple of those from the first ones, because there was a lot came in, and I kept some in the office because I had to make up 3 at least. And I think 5, I made up altogether.
And doesn't it say in very small print, Rochester, New York, at the base of what would be the hill? Because I think someone, since the transfer to digital, has when Luke's lightsaber is stuck in the ground in the cave, I think for a very split second, someone could see Rochester on one of the sabers. In Empire, you wouldn't have been involved.
I've got, Graflex took my original. They bought out Graflex. I don't know if you can see it. Graflex is now a private company. So they did a set of 10 only, which I had to sign and do everything. They made a perfect replica of it.
Oh, wow.
That's the original one.
See, Chris, that's how you show off a prop.
Right. So in the end there, it's got a lot, I don't think you can read it. No, the light's terrible here. But anyway, all of that is done. So that was a Graflex. They made 10 only, and they sold out within seconds. They're beautifully done. And they sell bits of Graflex. They have all the tools and everything. They bought it out, the company. And so that's, you can buy if you want a red button or you want a piece of a barrel. They have all of that.
Right. Well, Zenger, the important thing to remember is that it's not Roger's responsibility that one shot in The Empire Strikes Back, you can read Rochester, New York on the bottom of it. And the movie he worked on, you never see that.
Oh my gosh, you can.
And
sorry, I didn't cue it up and I'm not looking at it right now.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant as a slide. The transfer to digital, so many things. I know you've talked about it, Roger, where so much had George wanted to cover up all the tape on 3PO and Darth Vader, which is great that, to clean up the films the way he did. But where do you stand on special edition versus the original version of the film? Because it's hard now for just any casual fan of the film to watch the original unaltered version now.
Yeah, unless you've got an old VHS tape.
Or someone who's a deep into fandom and gets an edit and it's made a fan edit, which
or a Laserdisc. It's on the Laserdisc on the original. But George's reasoning always is like Jabba the Hutt. He was always supposed to be a creature. There just was not the money or the time or the amount of technique at the time to do it. So it's an actor doing it. So I kind of understand George, because that was never in his head. It was always disappointing for him. And the moment he could do it, he put it in there. Things like that's okay. He's always kind of said, that's how I see things. So that's how they should be seen by the audience. So, which I understand. Maybe one day somewhere they'll put out an original so that people could see where it all came from. I don't think that would harm, personally.
No, not at all.
I don't think so, because, and it's like his argument over Guido shot first. His mind was still set that it's made for 9-year-old children to 12-year-olds, so he was afraid that Han Solo would look like it would. He would become a killer if he was doing it first. But I always said,
but we all loved him for that.
Yeah, and he's a cowboy. He's a cowboy. That's what they do, and I don't think that hurt. So he has given in on that. As you know, he's compromised. So they both shoot at the same time now.
Yeah, it went from Greedo never shot to Greedo shot a few times. Yeah. But the fun thing is, and I have no problems with the special editions because the originals will always be there in some form, even if it's just in my memory. But it is fun to watch the different iterations and how things have changed. Like the Crate Dragon screams 6 different ways over the years.
I mean, the Crate Dragon, that's another one that came from John Barry put that skeleton in a drawing when C-3PO and R2-D2 land on Tatooine. And that was one. I said, I can't afford to do a skeleton. How are we going to do that? I don't have the money to even make a lightsaber. So it was by sheer accident, the property master told me he needed more space and they were throwing out everything in the attic in what was then Bourne Wood Studios. And there was the full-size dinosaur skeleton. I just had it put down in the parking lot, and I got it out and put it on the truck, and we were able to put it. And I like that because it gave a history of something in that planet. It wasn't just dunes. Now, who would have believed that became the Crate Dragon, and it's now got a huge history going forward.
And I know the people who've actually went and did the archaeological work to find it.
David West Reynolds.
And I do see that I don't know where I was seeing it, but I was getting a lot of reminders to, if you'd like to own a piece of history, it's like buying dirt from Dracula's castle in the back of a comic book almost. Like, you can own this bit of the Crate Dragon.
Well, I've got David West Reynolds who went and found it in the documentary, going on talking about it, and some of the pieces that are now now at Rancho Obi-Wan. So those are all things that are fun, But I'm glad that Phantom Menace is getting its praise now and coming out because I think it's a great movie, personally. Not just because I worked on it. I just think I go as a cinema viewer and it's just nonstop from the beginning to the end, and the characters are really good. And in a way, it's the real ending of Star Wars, which is George's philosophy when Luke gets Darth Vader, they have that fight, and Darth Vader wants to kill Luke, and Luke wants to kill Darth Vader. It's like father wants to kill son, son wants to kill the father. This is ancient mythology. And when he gets to the point where, and it's like the animal kingdom where the young one gets the older one down, like the young lion will defeat the older one at some point. And what does he do? He doesn't kill him. He switches off his lightsaber. And there's this kind of look of compassion and forgiveness between the two of them. That's George's words for what he wanted all of Star Wars to be about. That represents the kind of Buddhist vision, if you like, of the Jedis and everything. That's kind of a fitting end in a way that ended that first kind of period.
Well, you heard it. Roger said that Return of the Jedi is the real ending of Star Wars. You guys all heard it here. But hey, this has been really great. We really appreciate your time.
Not at all.
And but I just want to throw out there, anybody who wants to hear more from Roger, you should check out his book, Cinema Alchemist. It's great, and it goes into a ton of detail about his work on A New Hope and Alien specifically. There's a lot more in there, but if you like that stuff, there's a ton of it in his book. And we're going to have him at our event in Toronto called May the North Be With You in August, where you could, if you go to that, you'll actually be able to bother him in person and ask him interesting questions about episode 1 over there. And we had him at our event last year, and God bless Roger, he sat through 2 or 3 panels all about action figures, and he didn't even leave or complain or anything. It was crazy.
No, it was always, meeting Kenner, I didn't know either that Kenner toys, a lot were made in Toronto in a factory here. I mean, there was a lot of stuff you learn, and Kenner, it's another story, where every studio toy maker turned them down. And this little kind of company said, "Oh, we'll do it," and look what happened. It's the story of Star Wars itself again.
Yeah, that's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
We really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Have a good night, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Yeah, nice to meet you all. Bye. See you. May the North be with you.
I think we should have talked about Darth Jar Jar. I think he would have really been receptive to it.
He might have known. He might have known something.
Oh my God. So conclude this episode of Knights of Vader Star Wars Podcast, yada, 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 Facebook group, yada, 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 at KOV Podcast on Instagram. If you like what you hear, you should have asked Rob why there's not been any Cinemoddities content since October. So many questions left unanswered after this discussion. But when you are not lamenting the questions, you could have asked Roger Christian. Chris, what are you up to?
You know, if you want to bother Roger Christian, you can come to May the North and be with you in Toronto in August. It's going to be a good time. We can hang out and bother Roger Christian and other Kenner employees who also worked on Star Wars things. And, you know, if you want to hear more from Roger firsthand, I have a great panel that we recorded with him at our last event. So if you just search Roger Christian and May the North be with you, you can get another hour of Roger Christian content that's mostly about A New Hope, which is fun. You should check that out.
Zenger, when you are not harassing former Lucasfilm employees, what are you up to?
I'm never not. I just want to harass Lucas. I do a podcast that's ZengThis, the nerd stuff. Yeah. I just want to ask him, what is his go-to Chinese food order? I feel with that knowledge, I can truly understand the man that gave us Star Wars.
We should have asked him a Detours question. Where's the vault? Where's the vault located?
No, I can't ask that.
George likes his chicken spicy.
I can't ask that on the podcast. I need to ask that personally. The podcast, right. Then the people will know I have the answer. Then I'll get the vault.
Joe, when Cal Kestis is not writing the Titan sub down to the floor bed, can't finish the sentence.
What he is.
Can't finish that anymore. Joe, what shenanigans are you up to?
Oh no, just starting some trouble, printing off some stupid stuff.
So
it's fun. It's good.
So I do want to point out Joe's resistance to ask him about the Titan sub being written by Cal Kestis. I appreciate the fact that Roger Christian did not have to answer that question. So something for next time.
Next time. All right, that's on my list of things to ask.
First thing. First and only question.
First thing out of the gate. I got a question for you. What are your opinions on a Titan sub? And who's the Star Wars character to write it?
Remember the time when Roger Christian said they called it Suicide Week in Tunisia, and Zenger just laughs out of control?
I knew where it was going. I'm like, oh man, everybody was dying from heat. I did not expect the Hugh McGregor just walking around being like, I'm in Star Wars. Even though it's 100%.
I do like that Rick McCollum just embraces the cheap labor, though. He's like, think about it. Extras, London. We've got all these people here in Tunisia. Whatever, we'll,
we don't even have to feed them.
Give them a nickel and a mask, and they're in the movie.
We better hope they don't have internet in Prague, Chris. A cease and desist letter.
I heard a story that they use Q-tips on them. No, but they actually film Q-tips with faces.
Yeah, Doug Chang, when he did the model of that arena, it's all just Q-tips. But no, we're talking about human Q-tips, which is what he was actually filming out in Tunisia.
All right, Russ. I would like to give you a proper send-off, but good luck topping that. But go ahead.
Well, if you'd like to hear more about human Q-tips, check out the Unbelievers Podcast on YouTube and wherever else you get podcasts. Check it out if you like fun paranormal comedy and parody stuff. We need more serious interviews because you got to hold back so much goofy Knights of Vader junk that it's like a valve you open up at the end. Like, oh, no, we can finally say all this dumb stuff.
All right, folks. Good night, but not goodbye. And as always, may the Force be with you.
What did you not get to ask that you really wanted to, Zach?
I asked everything I wanted to ask. I bring up sequel trilogy nonsense.
Perfect.
You did. That was very
shut that down. Just